I would like to introduce another Carey School alumni, Heber Kirkland, and his Panther Points of Pride video.
Good afternoon. I'm Heber Kirkland. I graduated from Cary High School in 1959. There were 13 of us in the graduating class. Some memories that I have of Carey School. I remember going to the first grade with Mrs. Lillian Smith. I remember the second grade with Mrs. Muriel Sparks in the basement of the old school down by the boulder where they put the coal in the furnace. And I went to school in the old building. The gymnasium was very short, and the ceiling was very high. And those are some of the memories that I have of school. Seems like when we were going on field trips or going to basketball or football games, I remember riding the bus, and that was always an experience too. Had a lot of great teachers over the years in the schools, from elementary up through high school. I remember Mr. Ken Cook, and one of the things that he taught me a great deal about was how to write, about spelling and grammar and punctuation. Appreciated that very much. Appreciated Bob Day as a teacher. You could ask him any question about what is lightning, and you could get a full answer of how that is called, what that creates, and the results of that. They were great teachers. Mr. Harry Wicks was a algebra teacher and very knowledgeable. Learned a great deal of math and algebra from him. Had lots of friends in high school. Probably my best friend growing up through high school was Tony Alberson, and he always had some type of vehicle to drive us in, starting with a 37 Ford at one time. And we knew every back road in Cary from beginning to the end. Kent and Johnny Briggs were also friends that I associated a lot with, and with Bob Sweat. And we were always involved in hunting a lot. It didn't matter if it was out of the car or wherever, but we were always chasing rabbits or pheasants, it seemed like, all of the time. And did a lot together on the in track and basketball and football, and so I enjoyed being with them. One of the things I remember, maybe about my senior year, about 1959, a group of us boys went to Twin Falls to see a minor league baseball game. Twin Falls Cowboys were playing, and that game lasted for 18 innings. A homer by the Cowboys in the 18th inning, and I don't know how long it lasted, but one of the friends that went was Kent Patterson, who was the son of Ralph Patterson, and he vowed after that time that he was never going to a game again because it was too long. But when I was in high school, I knew that I wanted to go to college when I finished there. And as I went to BYU, I declared my major as bacteriology. But after I took some of those chemistry and math classes, I decided that that's not exactly what I wanted, so I declared then that my major would be biology. I went on a mission to Southern California, and it was there that I discovered that I enjoyed teaching people. I found out that it was easy for me to remember specific things and to memorize lots of different materials. And so I thought that when I finished it, I would like to be a teacher. And so when I returned from my mission in 1962, attending BYU, I pursued that. I had enough credits in 1965 to graduate from BYU, and so I did so, and unknowingly my wife Rosalie, that I married in 1969, was in that same graduating class, but we did not know each other. And the next year I did my student teaching and completed the hours that I needed for a teaching certificate and did some graduate work, and so finished BYU in 1966. I had applied for several jobs, and one of the jobs I applied for was in Colorado, and it was at a place called Weldona, and I remember getting a letter from the superintendent, Richard White, and he was single-space typed letter, and he told me all about the little town there, and he lived in the bigger town of Fort Morgan, which is about 11 miles away, and he said, "Come here, you have great experience." And so I went out there for an interview in April of that year, and I was approved by the board for that job. And so in August of 1966, I went to Weldona, Colorado, and taught at Weldon Valley High School. I taught social studies, and I was the football, basketball, and track coach. There were not a great number of students there, only 51 students in the student body, and so it was quite small. One of my objectives that I always had was that I wanted to get as much experience as possible in a short period of time, and that was the place that I got it. I taught 6 classes every day, and besides social studies, I also had biology. And it was my responsibility also as a coach to provide transportation to the athletes after practice if they did not have a car or a way to get home. And some of those places were in a little town called Orchard, about 15 miles away. There are a couple of boys that lived there, and they always seemed to need a ride. And so I drove a small van type bus to get them home. Whenever there were football games, or basketball games, or track meets, I was the bus driver, going and coming, and providing that transportation. After a year of that, I decided that I'd had enough education, and so I moved back to Cary. Did not have a job, but within about 2 weeks I got a call from Dallas Ward, my friend from Richfield, who was teaching driver's ed at O'Leary Junior High School in Twin Falls. He said Mel Gates, who was a social studies teacher and assistant varsity coach at the high school, had resigned. He was going to be an insurance salesman, and he said, "You should apply." And so I applied, had an interview with the superintendent, and in about 2 days was offered that job. And so I went to Twin Falls in the fall of 1967, and I would eventually spend 7 years there teaching. The main class that I taught was U.S. history to juniors, and I would have anywhere from 20 to 30 students that I would teach each day. Usually I'd have 4 classes some years I might have 5. Then I also had a PE class with athletes the last period of the day, some of that time. I did serve as the assistant basketball coach to Charlie Farmer, and the main team that I coached was called the JV team. It was actually juniors that were not quite ready for varsity competition, and I'd helped to prepare them to be on the varsity squad the next year. I did that for 3 years. After that, there was a change made the head coach, and so I was also changed, and I became the assistant cross country and track coach to Jerry Kleinkoff. I worked with him for 4 years in the fall and in the spring, and it's probably from Jerry that I learned so much about coaching and so much about track just from him. We did have a great set of athletes that came through at that time, and we won the state championship 4 years in a row from 70 through 1974. A lot of great young men came through there. I saw lots of changes, lots of improvement, and could see what could happen with a lot of good coaching and development of those young men. In 1969, Rosalie and I married. And when she came to Twin Falls, they found out that she was a first grade teacher. The district was excited because they had a need opening, and so she was hired to teach first grade in the old Washington School, where Albertson's store is now located in Twin Falls. And she enjoyed that very much for 2 years. And our first son, Lane, was born just a couple of weeks after she completed that second year. In 1974, we had decided that we would move back to Cary, and we had purchased a Boise Cascade house, and we put that on our property, and we began our home there. Eventually, we would have 4 children and raise them in that house. I did not have a teaching position for about 2 years. I spent most of the winters working for the Simpson brothers, lambing sheep and working in the lambing sheds. And I've always called that my great experience of the practical things of life. And it was a great experience in that extent of learning a lot about those things. In 1976, Lowell Ward, who was the chairman of the school board in Richfield, came to our house one night and said that there was an opening for me in Richfield, and that they would like me to come down there and teach, and so I said yes. And so I went to Richfield in 1976 to teach us social studies, and my main coaching assignments were boys and girls track, and I also assisted Joe Hendrickson when he was the coach of the football team. One thing that was kind of unique, and I don't know if this has happened before, but the LDS bishop in Richfield was Delbert Tree, and he and his wife were good friends of my older sister when they were missionaries in Mississippi, so they knew each other. And he said, we cannot find a seminary teacher for this year. How would you like to teach seminary every morning before you teach school? So I did. So for a year I drove to Richfield every morning and taught seminary. And then in the years after that, when I was not doing seminary, Joe Hendricks and I drove to Richfield for the next 4 years together, carpooling as he taught in that school also. I was the varsity basketball coach from about the middle 3 years that I was there, and I resigned from that position in 1980 when I was called to be the bishop in Cary, and I needed to have more time for that. But I taught in Richfield up through 1980. Then there's an opening that developed here in Cary, and so I came to Cary, taught social studies, and began about 18 years of being an assistant coach to Blaine Tingey with track, and that was always a great experience. Also, not too well known that during that first year that I was in Cary, I was the girls' volleyball coach, and I gained a great deal of experience in that opportunity. In 1982, I became the boys' varsity coach and coached them for 19 years, and we had a lot of downs during the 1980s, but we had a lot of ups in the 1990s with our football program. And during that time, we would have opportunity of playing in the state championship football game 5 times. We would win 2 times, 1994, 1998, and had great opportunities. Many young men coming through there, seeing their growth and experiences as they progressed. In 2001, Rosalie and I both retired as teachers from the Blaine County School District. Rosalie had spent 26 years as a classroom teacher. I'd spent 33 years, and we thought that we would just have a little bit of downtime for a while. About 2 months after that, we decided we got to do something, and so we decided to go on a mission. And so we would go to the Navajo Indian Reservation for a year and a half in Window Rock, Arizona. And sometimes we often call that our best mission. It was really one of getting right down in the dirt, literally, every day with people and seeing how they lived and working with them. And when we came back from that mission, we just thought that we would just enjoy ourselves for a while, and it lasted for 3 weeks until I was called to be the bishop again. And that would go for about another 3 years. In 1967, in 2007, and 2008, we went on a mission to Nauvoo, Illinois, and we worked as site missionaries in restored houses and businesses of old Nauvoo, giving tours to guests that came from all over the United States and all over the world to that place. We also went on another mission in 2014 to Salt Lake City, to the Family History Library, to help people there find their ancestors and find out more about their family history. Since 2009, we have been temple workers in the Twin Falls Temple. That was completed in 2008, and we enjoy going there weekly and being of service to the people that come there each day. And we currently have 18 grandchildren, and so we spend a great deal of time going to lots of sporting and musical events, particularly when you have about 5 or 6 teenagers at the same time. It's quite a balancing act to get to all of those activities, but we try to be of support to them. So that just gives you a little rundown on some of the things that we have done in our life to this point. You know, when I went to college, I felt that I had as good a preparation as any student, even though I came from a small school. I had 4 years of English, I had geometry and 2 years of algebra, I had a year of physics, I had a year of chemistry, plus the other subjects that we would take. And I felt that that was I had as good a preparation as anybody. And I shouldn't say this, but when I had my first English class, they gave us a spelling test, and I never missed a word. And people in the class were amazed that I could spell. Well, I don't know. And that just came from the teachers that I had. They started early. And so I felt that if I could do that, that I was prepared to do that. And another thing that I can remember we did in high school, and I don't know what year it was, or maybe it was all 4 years, but at least once a week, or every 2 weeks anyway, there was one day in English where you had to write a theme. And you didn't know what the subject was till you got in class, and you had to have it finished 45 minutes later. And I think that's probably the greatest preparation I had in learning to use words and to put together sentences. And I will still be a great advocate of diagramming sentences. It's the best way there is to learn English. And so I don't know if they do much of that now today, but they should. I guess probably the hardest experience that I ever had, that when I was late in my 15th year, is my dad died suddenly of a heart attack. And I was the youngest child, the only boy. 2 of my sisters were married. My sister Buffet was in college. And so I was left to be the caretaker of the farm and take care of my mother. And that was the time when we were milking 8 to 10 cows by hand, and we were flood irrigating, and we did not own farm equipment much. We did hired out mostly custom work, but that was one of the things that I really had to adapt to, and what I had to do. And it was very interesting that the first 6 months I had a great help from Alan Para and these 2 boys, Kurt and Bob, and they used to come over every night and morning for about 6 months and help me milk those cows so that it would not take quite so long, but a great service. And about 6 months later or so, I got the first milking machine I'd ever owned in my life. I thought I was in heaven, because it took a while to train the cows, but they got used to it, and it was good after that. Next year or so I got another bucket, and so that helped a lot. But during that time I maintained going to school, but before then I had to have the milking done every morning. Then I had to milk at night when I came home. And it's going to vary a lot depending on the basketball and track practices and whatever. But the principal was always great for me. I remember sometimes I'm milking cows at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and then get on the bus and go on a trip, and like that. But that helped a lot. But that taught me a great deal of responsibility. You got to be there. The cows do not wait, and you got to do that. And so I'd never really done a lot of flood irrigating. Learned a great deal that first year. I probably set a record of having dams washed out. But I finally learned about using those steel posts to put behind those things, and they do a marvelous job. And so taking care of the water and taking care of the crops and the cows, just a great experience. And all the time that I was doing that, every summer, I was bucking bales for Cleo Peterson or Vince Olson or Mac Barton or whoever. And so when I wasn't working here, I was working for somebody else. And so just taught a lot about taking care of yourself, working hard, and making ends meet. Well, Education is very key to lots of things, although there's a lot of changes taking place in the world today. And sometimes a complete four-year college degree is what some of you need, but some of you don't need that. Some of you need to get into a vocation of training, a year or 2 years, where that you can gain a skill and have a job in a short period of time. And that job can lead you to other things that you would like to do. But you need to look at your situation and what your interests are. And if you're interested in something that just takes a year or two, do it, get that, work at it. And this will lead you to other things that you really want to get to in the future. But if you want to be a teacher and go 4 years and do that, okay. Want to be a mechanical engineer and do that, okay. Or a doctor, you can do that too. But get the education that you need for your particular situation. Well, just proud of our children and their families. I think that's one of the great legacies that any parents have of the things that their children and grandchildren are doing. And none of us are perfect and got a lot of faults and things like that, but we just strive to do our best. And I think Rosalie and I would say that that's what means the most to us, is our children and our grandchildren. I'm Heber Kirkland, graduate from the class of 1959 Cary High School.